Ethan had never imagined that his life would take such a strange turn. A young soldier from Earth, he had always dreamed of adventure, but nothing prepared him for the journey he was about to undertake. The mission he was on was not a typical military operation. It was a diplomatic mission, one that required him to travel to an alien planet, Valora, as the first human to ever set foot there. As his spaceship approached the planet, Ethan looked out of the window at the vast, beautiful world below. The surface was a mix of towering mountains, lush green forests, and sparkling blue oceans. He had studied the planet's geography, but seeing it in person was breathtaking. The Valora people, he knew, were known for their beauty and grace. They were a peaceful, highly intelligent species, and Earth's leaders hoped to form a strong alliance with them. Ethan was nervous. He had never interacted with aliens before. He had read reports, studied languages, and practiced the customs of the Valora people, but nothing could truly prepare him for the moment when he would meet them face to face. The ship landed softly on the planet's surface, and Ethan stepped out, his heart pounding in his chest. He was greeted by a group of Valora officials, but what caught his attention immediately were the 4 women standing with them. They were unlike anyone he had ever seen before. Their beauty was beyond human understanding. Tall, elegant, with glowing skin and long, flowing hair in every imaginable shade. Each one had an aura of power and grace, but their eyes, they were filled with curiosity and wonder as they stared at Ethan. The moment was surreal. Ethan felt like a child among giants. The women were not just beautiful, they were also incredibly strong and intelligent. As he was introduced to them, he couldn't help but feel a wave of uncertainty. How could he, a simple human, possibly fit in among such extraordinary beings? The first woman, Syria, stepped forward. She had silver hair that shimmered like moonlight and eyes that sparkled with an intense, intelligent gaze. She was the leader among the 4, and it was clear she was someone of great importance. When she smiled at him, Ethan felt a sudden warmth, a sense of comfort that calmed his nerves. "Welcome to Valora, Earth's first ambassador," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. "We have heard much about your people. I trust you will find your stay here enlightening." Ethan nodded, though his mind raced. He had been prepared for this moment, but standing in front of such beauty and power, he felt small. He could only hope he would not embarrass himself. He had heard that the Valora had a deep respect for strength, both mental and physical. But how could a human, with his fragile body and limited abilities, possibly impress them? The other 3 women introduced themselves. There was Aria, with dark blue hair and an aura of mystery, Talia, with golden eyes that seemed to see straight through him, and Lyra, who was quiet but had an air of fierce determination about her. Each of them studied him with a mixture of fascination and intrigue. Ethan felt their eyes on him constantly, but he couldn't help but wonder what they saw in him. After all, to them, he was just a human, a primitive, unremarkable being from a distant world. As the day progressed, Ethan was shown around the palace. The architecture was stunning, far more advanced than anything on Earth. The Valora had perfected the art of blending nature with technology. Trees grew through the buildings, and bioluminescent plants illuminated the halls at night. It felt like stepping into another world entirely. But despite the beauty and wonder surrounding him, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. He was different. The Valora women, with their grace and intelligence, were leagues ahead of him in almost every way. He felt like an outsider, a visitor in a world where he was the odd one out. Throughout the day, the women observed him closely. Their curiosity about humans was evident. They asked him questions about Earth, about human history, and about his experiences as a soldier. Ethan answered as best as he could, though he often found himself lost for words. The Valora were so advanced, so perfect, that he felt like he had little to offer them in return. Syria, however, seemed different. She often lingered by his side, her eyes studying him with an intensity that made Ethan feel both nervous and strangely comfortable. Her questions were more personal than the others. She wanted to know about Ethan's dreams, his hopes for the future, and what it meant to be human. She listened intently, as though she genuinely cared about his answers. By the end of the day, Ethan had learned much about the Valora, but they had learned just as much about him. They had observed his mannerisms, his way of thinking, and his kindness. He could see in their eyes that they were intrigued by him, but he couldn't understand why. He was just a human, weak, imperfect, and not at all like them. Later that evening, as Ethan sat alone in his quarters, he reflected on the day. The Valora women were fascinating, beautiful, and powerful, but they were also kind and curious. Syria, in particular, had shown him a kindness he hadn't expected. He wasn't sure what this would mean for his mission, or for the future, but he knew one thing for sure. This was going to be a journey like no other. As he looked out the window at the alien world below, he realized that he was no longer just a soldier on a mission. He was a part of something much bigger, something far more complicated. And perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't so out of place here after all. New bonds. The days on Valora passed quickly for Ethan, but they were not without challenges. Every morning, he woke up to the strange beauty of the planet. The alien landscape was stunning. Bright blue skies, lush green forests, and colorful plants that he had never seen before. The Valora were unlike anything he had imagined. They were not only beautiful, but seemed to have an inner peace and intelligence that Ethan had never encountered before. Despite his initial nervousness, he was starting to feel more at ease in their presence. But there was one thing Ethan hadn't expected: the growing connection he felt towards Syria. From the very beginning, she had shown him a kindness and curiosity that he couldn't ignore. While the other women had been polite and welcoming, it was Syria who had taken a special interest in him. She often asked him questions about Earth, human history, and even the simplest things, like what it was like to grow up on Earth. Syria was not like the others. Her silver hair shimmered like the moonlight, and her eyes were a deep, intelligent blue. She carried herself with an air of grace, but there was something more, something deeper that made Ethan feel as though she saw through him. At first, Ethan had tried to brush off the idea of a connection. After all, she was an alien princess, and he was just a human soldier. It felt impossible for someone like him to even think about forming a deeper bond with someone like her. But as the days went by, Ethan found himself spending more and more time with Syria. They would often walk together through the gardens, talking about everything and nothing at all. She seemed to enjoy learning about Earth, and he was fascinated by the stories she told of Valora's history and culture. Over time, their conversations became more personal. Syria would ask about Ethan's dreams, his fears, and the things that made him who he was. She listened with such attention, as though his words were the most important thing in the world. Ethan began to feel something stirring inside him, something he couldn't quite explain. He had always been focused on his duty, on the mission he had been sent to complete. But now, as he looked into Syria's eyes, he couldn't deny that he was starting to care about her in a way he hadn't expected. One afternoon, as they sat in the palace garden, Syria spoke in a softer voice than usual. "Ethan," she said, her eyes locking with his, "I have been thinking about you, about Earth, and about what it means to be human." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had never heard her speak like that before. There was a certain vulnerability in her voice, something that made him want to reach out and comfort her, even though he wasn't sure how. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, his voice betraying the curiosity he felt. Syria paused for a moment, looking down at her hands. "I have lived my life with purpose, with duty. Everything I've done has been for my people, for Valora. But when I look at you, I see something different. I see someone who isn't bound by tradition, someone who doesn't have to follow the rules, someone who can think for himself. You live with freedom, Ethan, and that is something I have always wanted." Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He hadn't thought of it like that before. To him, being human meant struggling, fighting for survival, and facing challenges head-on. It was true that humans didn't have the advanced technology or the peaceful culture that the Valora had, but they had something else, something that made them unique. I never thought about it like that, Ethan said, his voice quiet. But it's true. We humans don't always follow the rules. Sometimes we make mistakes, but we learn from them. Syria smiled softly, her eyes sparkling. That is what makes you so interesting, Ethan. You are unlike any other species I have met. Ethan felt a warm flush rise to his cheeks. He wasn't sure how to respond. Part of him wanted to believe that maybe Syria felt the same way about him that he felt about her. But the other part of him knew that their worlds were so different. How could a human and a Valora ever be more than just allies? As the days passed, the bond between Ethan and Syria continued to grow. They spent more time together, walking through the gardens, talking late into the night, and sharing moments of laughter. Each conversation brought them closer, and Ethan couldn't help but feel drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected. He began to look forward to their time together, eagerly awaiting the moments when they could talk, laugh, and simply be in each other's presence. Syria, too, seemed to enjoy their time together. She would often look at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and admiration. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to ask her what she was thinking. He didn't want to risk ruining the delicate balance they had created. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Syria turned to him with a serious expression. "Ethan," she said, her voice quiet, "there is something I need to tell you." Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. Was she going to say what he feared, that they could never be more than just allies, that their differences were too great to overcome? Syria paused, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that my feelings for you are real. I am not sure what this means, but I wanted you to know." Ethan's heart raced. For the first time since coming to Valora, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something more between them. He didn't know what would happen next, but in that moment, he didn't care. He had found something special, something worth fighting for. As they sat in silence, the stars above them shining brightly, Ethan realized that this was only the beginning. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He and Syria were bound by something stronger than just duty, something that was growing stronger with each passing day. And for the first time since landing on Valora, Ethan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had found a place where he truly belonged. The unexpected test. Ethan's relationship with Syria was growing stronger with each passing day. They spent more time together, sharing stories and laughing. But as time went on, Ethan began to feel a sense of unease. It wasn't that he didn't enjoy his time with Syria. Far from it. He was more comfortable with her than he had ever been with anyone. But he couldn't ignore the growing pressure of being in an alien world. The expectations, the different cultures, and the looming question of what his role was all started to weigh on him. One evening, after a quiet walk through the palace gardens, Syria seemed distant. Ethan noticed the change immediately. She had been open and warm, but now there was something about her that felt closed off. "Syria, is everything all right?" Ethan asked, concern creeping into his voice. He stopped walking, turning to face her. "You've been quiet. Did I say something wrong?" Syria hesitated before responding. She looked up at the sky, as if searching for the right words. "It's not you, Ethan. There's something I need to explain." Her voice was serious, and Ethan could see that she was struggling to find the right words. "What's wrong?" he asked again, his voice softer now. He could feel his heart beat faster, unsure of what was going on. Syria finally turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and sadness. "There is a trial," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A test that you must pass. It is part of Valora's customs. Every outsider who comes here must face it to prove their worth." Ethan's stomach tightened. "A test? What kind of test?" "It is not a test of strength or skill, but a test of character," Syria explained. "It is a trial that every Valora goes through. It's meant to show if someone is worthy of being part of our world, of being accepted into our society. Ethan furrowed his brow. And I have to take this test. Syria nodded. Yes. The Valora Council has decided that you must face it. It is tradition. If you pass, you will be accepted fully into our world. If you fail, well, it's not something I like to think about. Ethan's heart raced. He hadn't expected something like this. All he had wanted was to learn about Valora, to help with the mission, and to be with Syria. He had never imagined that he would be put to a test, and the idea of failing filled him with dread. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't back down. If he wanted to stay, to be with Syria, he had to face whatever came his way. When do I have to take this test? Ethan asked, trying to steady his nerves. Tomorrow, Syria said. You will be brought before the council, and you will face the trial. They will ask you questions, and you must answer them honestly. Your answers will determine whether you are worthy of being accepted here. The next day, Ethan stood before the Valora Council, his heart racing. He was in a large, circular room, surrounded by the most important figures of Valora. Their gazes were intense, studying him as if they were trying to peer into his very soul. Syria stood by his side, offering him a reassuring glance, but even she seemed nervous. Ethan could tell that this was no ordinary test. Human, one of the council members, an elder Valora with long golden hair, said in a commanding voice, "You stand before us today as an outsider, someone who does not belong to our world. But you have spent time among us, and now we must decide whether you are worthy to remain. You will answer our questions. Answer them truthfully, and we will judge you accordingly." Ethan swallowed hard. This wasn't going to be easy, but he had no choice. He had to go through with it. He could feel the eyes of the council on him, but Syria's presence next to him gave him a small sense of comfort. He glanced at her quickly and saw that she was watching him closely, her face filled with concern. The first council member spoke again. "What is the greatest strength of your species?" Ethan thought carefully before responding. "Humans are survivors. We have faced wars, natural disasters, and countless challenges, but we always find a way to overcome them. We fight for what's important, and we don't give up." The council murmured, nodding in agreement. But the next question came quickly. "And what is the greatest weakness of your species?" Ethan hesitated. This was harder. Admitting weaknesses wasn't easy, especially when he had to do it in front of people who didn't know him. Humans can be reckless. We often act without thinking, and that has led to mistakes. But we learn from those mistakes, and we try to do better. The council seemed to consider his answer for a moment before the third question came. "What would you do if your life and the life of someone you care about were at risk? Would you choose your own survival or theirs?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The question felt personal, and he knew that the council was testing more than just his morals. They were testing his heart, his very soul. "I would choose their survival," he said without hesitation. "If someone I cared about were in danger, I would do everything I could to protect them, even if it meant sacrificing myself." The room fell silent for a moment. The council members exchanged looks, nodding to each other. Syria's eyes were fixed on him, filled with something that looked like admiration, and something deeper. Finally, the elder council member spoke again. "You have answered truthfully, and your answers show that you have the strength of character to belong here. The council has decided. You have passed the test." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He had done it. He had passed. Syria stepped forward, a smile breaking across her face. She took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You did it, Ethan. You proved yourself." Ethan looked at her, feeling a rush of relief and pride. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he truly belonged in this world, with Syria, with the Valora. But he knew that this was only the beginning. There were still many challenges ahead, and he wasn't sure what the future held. But one thing was certain, he was ready to face whatever came next. Secrets revealed. Ethan's heart still raced after the trial. The council had accepted him, and he had passed their test, but the relief he felt was quickly replaced by another emotion, curiosity. There was something in Suraya's eyes that day, something she hadn't shared with him. Despite her warm smile and the way she held his hand, Ethan could sense there was something more. It was as if she was hiding something, something important. Later that evening, as they walked through the palace's grand hallways, Ethan couldn't keep the question to himself any longer. "Syria," he began, his voice soft but filled with concern. "There's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" Syria stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice a little too calm. "I don't know," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "It's just, after the trial, you seemed distant, like you were carrying something heavy. I can see it in your eyes. If there's something you need to tell me, I want to know." Suria's gaze softened. She took a deep breath, and for a moment, it seemed as if she was about to speak. But then she shook her head slowly. "I'm not sure you're ready for the truth," she whispered. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. "What do you mean? We've been through so much already. I thought we could talk about anything." Syria hesitated, then looked down at the ground. "There are things about me, things about my family, about Valora, that you don't understand, things that are dangerous to know." Ethan stepped closer to her, his voice firm. "I want to understand. I want to be part of this. If we're going to be together, you have to trust me." "Syria." For a long moment, Syria didn't speak. Her eyes darted around, as though looking for an escape. Then, with a resigned sigh, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're right. I can't keep hiding it. But you have to promise me something." Ethan nodded eagerly. "Anything. You have to promise that you won't run away when you hear the truth, that you'll stay with me, no matter what." "I promise," Ethan said without hesitation. He could feel his pulse quicken. The weight of her words was heavy, and he knew something big was coming. Syria took a deep breath and began. "I'm not just an ordinary Valora. I am the daughter of the ruler of Valora, the one who will someday take the throne." Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, what? You're a princess?" Syria nodded slowly, looking both pained and ashamed. "Yes, but it's not as simple as it seems. Being a princess here isn't like being a princess on Earth. Our world, our people, it's complicated. The Valora Council, the ruling families, they don't just pick anyone to rule. They choose those who are strong, those who can lead. But there's more." Ethan's mind raced. This was unexpected. Syria, the woman he had been growing so close to, was royalty. And yet, her expression told him that her life was far from perfect. "What else? What aren't you telling me?" Syria looked around once more, then grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward a small, hidden chamber at the far end of the hall. Inside, it was quiet, almost like a secret space. Only then did she finally speak again, her voice barely audible. "My father, the ruler, he has made an arrangement with the Valora Council. He wants me to marry someone who can strengthen our rule. But I don't love him, Ethan. I don't even like him. I was supposed to marry a Valora prince. They'd been pushing me into this union for years." Ethan's mind was spinning. "But if you're a princess, why are you here with me? Why not just follow what your father wants?" Syria's eyes flashed with a mix of sadness and anger. "Because I don't want to be controlled by anyone. I don't want to be married off for political gain. And I don't want to be a puppet. My father's plans are dangerous. He's working with the council to bring about something I don't agree with." Ethan could feel the weight of her words. "What is he planning? What do you mean by dangerous?" Syria shook her head. "I don't know all the details, but there's talk of an alliance that could put Valora at odds with other powerful civilizations in the galaxy. My father wants to make sure Valora stays at the top, but I fear that what he's planning will lead to war. I'm not sure where my father's loyalty lies anymore." Ethan's heart raced. "So your father doesn't care about you. He just wants power." Syria nodded, her expression hardening. "It's not just about me. It's about control. He's willing to do whatever it takes to secure that control, even if it means sacrificing innocent lives." Ethan took her hand, feeling a deep sense of protectiveness for her. "You don't have to do this alone, Syria. You don't have to marry someone you don't love. I'll help you. Whatever your father is planning, we can stop it." Syria looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You don't understand what you're saying, Ethan. If I go against my father, if I defy the council, it could mean my death. My people might turn against me. You might not even be safe here anymore." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm not leaving you. Not now. Not ever. We'll figure this out together. We'll face whatever comes." Sarita's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she smiled. A genuine, full smile. "You're right. Together. But we must move carefully. My father is powerful, and so is the council. We can't act too rashly." Ethan nodded. "I trust you, Syria. We'll do this your way." For the first time, Ethan felt the full weight of the situation. There was much more at stake now than he had realized. Syria was not just a woman he had grown close to. She was a princess, caught in a dangerous game of politics and power, and he had just become part of it. But he wasn't afraid. Whatever the cost, he would stand by her. Trouble strikes. The days after Syria revealed the truth about her royal heritage were tense. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about everything she had shared with him. The danger, her father's plans, and her fear of being forced into a marriage she didn't want. It was all too much. He knew he had to help her, but the weight of what they were up against was heavy. He also realized that the walls around her heart were higher now than ever before. It wasn't just her family she feared. It was the world she was born into, the world that expected so much from her. Syria seemed different. She was still the kind, beautiful alien woman he had fallen for, but now there was a hardness in her eyes. She moved with purpose, her mind always somewhere else, thinking about her father, her people, and the future that was being forced upon her. Ethan tried to support her as best as he could, but deep down, he knew that his life had changed forever. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of something much bigger. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Ethan looked up to see one of Soraya's trusted servants approaching. The servant's face was pale, and he moved quickly, almost nervously. "My princess," the servant said, bowing his head. "There's trouble. The council has sent word that your father wishes to see you immediately." Soraya's face went pale. She stood up, her eyes wide with fear. "What does he want?" she whispered, more to herself than to the servant. "He didn't say, my princess, but it's urgent. The council is assembling. It is not a request. Your presence is required." Syria didn't say anything at first. She simply stared into the distance, deep in thought. Then she turned to Ethan, her voice shaky. "They're moving faster than I thought. I need to go." Ethan stood up quickly, his eyes locked on hers. "I'll come with you. You don't have to face this alone." Syria shook her head. "No, you don't understand. If you're seen with me, the council will know something's wrong. They will use you against me, Ethan. You can't come." He felt a pang of frustration. "Syria, I don't care about the council or their games. I care about you. I'm not leaving your side." For a moment, it seemed like Syria would argue, but she sighed in defeat. "Fine, but you have to stay in the shadows. Let me handle this." With that, she hurried off toward the council chambers, her pace quickening as she moved through the palace corridors. Ethan followed from a distance, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't like this. Something was off. It was too quiet, too calm. He could feel the tension in the air. as if the calm before the storm was wrapping around them like a blanket. When they reached the council chamber, the doors were open, and voices could be heard inside. Ethan stayed hidden behind a pillar, just out of sight, watching as Syria entered the room. The council members were all gathered in a circle, their faces stern and their eyes cold. They turned toward her as she stepped inside. At the head of the room sat her father, a tall, imposing figure who exuded power with every movement. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met hers. For a brief moment, Ethan saw a flash of something in Saraya's expression, fear, but also anger. "Syria," her father said in a deep, commanding voice. "You've finally come." "I've come as requested," Syria replied, her voice steady despite the fear she must have been feeling. "What is it you need?" The council members exchanged glances, and one of them, a tall, older woman with graying hair, spoke up. "It's time, Princess. The Valora Council has made its decision. We've found you a suitable match. You will marry Prince Kalon of Zephyrus." Syria's breath caught in her throat. "I told you, I won't marry him." Her voice rang out, sharp and defiant. Her father raised a hand to silence her. "You will do what is required of you. This marriage will strengthen our ties with Zephyrus, and you will do your duty." Syria's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I don't care about your politics. I'm not marrying him." The council gasped, but her father's expression didn't change. "You have no choice, Syria. The council has spoken. This is not a suggestion. This is an order." Ethan's heart raced. He knew this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it real. Saraya's father was willing to sacrifice her happiness, her freedom, for the sake of power. The entire council, all those around her, expected her to obey without question. But Syria wasn't the kind of person to be controlled. Ethan knew that. He could see the fire burning in her eyes. She wouldn't back down. "I won't do it," Syria said again, her voice unwavering. The tension in the room was palpable. The council members exchanged murmurs, clearly unsettled by her refusal. Her father, however, remained calm. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You have two choices, Syria," he said coldly. "Marry him, or you will be disowned. Your title, your position, your life as you know it, all will be gone." Syria's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes flashed with defiance, but it was clear that her father's words had struck a nerve. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I can, and I will," her father said firmly. Ethan could see the pain in her eyes as she stood there, frozen. He wanted to run to her, to pull her out of that room and away from all of this, but he knew it wasn't that simple. Syria had more at stake than just her own happiness. She had her people, her world, and her father's power to consider. Just as the silence stretched on, a voice spoke from the back of the room. Ethan froze when he heard it, a voice he hadn't expected to hear. "Father," a man's voice called out. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The voice was deep, smooth, and it was one he recognized. Prince Kalon had entered the room, and Ethan's worst fears were about to come true. The final decision. Syria's mind raced as she left the council chambers. The words her father had spoken echoed in her head, but they didn't make sense. Her whole life, she had been trained to lead, to understand the politics of her people. But this was a decision that cut deeper than anything else. Marry Prince Kalon and give up her life as she knew it, or be disowned by her family forever. The weight of the choice seemed to press down on her chest. She walked quickly down the hallway, not even noticing the servants who bowed as she passed. Ethan had followed her at a safe distance, watching every move she made. He knew that the moment she stepped out of the council room, her world had changed forever. The princess had always been strong, confident, but now he saw cracks forming in the armor she had worn for so long. Ethan's heart clenched as he caught up with her. "Syria," he called softly. She didn't turn to look at him at first, her pace steady as if she was trying to outrun her thoughts. "Leave me alone, Ethan," she whispered, her voice shaking. There's nothing you can do. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly, reaching out to touch her arm. She stopped walking but didn't look up. Her eyes were distant, lost in her own thoughts. I don't know what to do, Syria said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't marry him. I can't be the tool of my father's political game. But if I don't, I lose everything. I lose my title, my family, and I'll never be able to protect the people I love. Ethan stepped closer, his hand still on her arm. You don't have to do this alone, Syria. You have me. You have people who care about you. For a moment, it seemed like Syria might argue again, but then she finally turned to face him. Her eyes were filled with emotion, a mix of pain, confusion, and fear. But I don't know if I can live with myself if I choose to fight. I can't make everyone hate me. They'll think I'm a traitor. Maybe they'll think you're a traitor, Ethan said gently, but you're doing what's right for you. Sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest choice, but it's still the right choice. Syria swallowed hard, trying to hold back tears. I've been forced into this life for so long. I was raised to think of the people, of my country. But I never thought about what I wanted. What if I choose the wrong path? Ethan squeezed her arm, trying to give her some comfort. The wrong path is the one that makes you miserable. Don't follow someone else's plan. Follow your heart. Suria's eyes searched his face, as if trying to read his thoughts. There was a moment of silence between them before she finally spoke. I can't stay here, Ethan. I can't be trapped in a life that's not mine. I need to leave this place. Ethan nodded. He knew she had to make the decision for herself, but he also knew that running away was not the only answer. There had to be a way to fight for what she wanted. What if we left together? He asked quietly. What if we found a way for you to keep your title, but not be bound to it? We could leave the palace, leave your father's demands behind. You don't have to give up everything, Syria. Her eyes widened, the idea taking hold. Leave? Leave the planet. But my people. You can still help them, Ethan replied. But you don't have to sacrifice yourself for them. You're more than just a princess. You're a person, Syria. Don't let anyone forget that, including yourself. Syria looked torn, but something in Ethan's words seemed to light a spark in her. I never thought about it that way. But how can I just walk away from everything I've known? I don't know, Ethan said with a small smile. But we can figure it out together. I'm not asking you to make a decision right now, but don't let your father or anyone else tell you what your life should be. You have the power to choose. Syria closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. When she opened them again, there was something different in her expression, less fear and more determination. I will make my decision, Ethan, she said softly. I won't let anyone decide for me. Ethan felt a surge of relief in his chest. He knew it wasn't over yet, but this was the first step. Syria was starting to see that she could take control of her life again. He wouldn't let her face this alone, no matter what came next. I'll be with you every step of the way, he said quietly. Whatever you decide, I'm here. Syria gave him a small smile, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Thank you. I don't know what I would do without you. Before they could talk any further, the sound of footsteps interrupted their moment. Syria's eyes darted to the end of the hallway, where two guards stood, watching them. I have to go, she said quickly, turning away from Ethan. But we'll talk more. Soon. As she walked away, Ethan stood there for a moment, watching her go. There was still so much to be done, so many dangers ahead. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like they had a chance. Syria wasn't alone anymore. She had him. And together, they would face whatever came next. A new beginning. Syria stood at the edge of the balcony, gazing out at the vast landscape. The city stretched far beneath her, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. Her heart was heavy with the weight of everything that had happened, but there was also a new sense of clarity in her. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to take control of it. Ethan had been with her every step of the way. He had stood by her, supported her, and reminded her that she wasn't alone in the choices she had to make. Now, it was time for her to take that final step. No more running. No more hiding. She had made her decision. The door behind her opened softly, and Ethan stepped into the room. His presence was calm and reassuring, as it always had been. He walked up to her, his footsteps steady, and stopped a few feet away. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly, his voice gentle. Syria nodded without turning around. She could feel the tension in the air, the uncertainty of what was to come, but she also felt something else. Hope. Hope for the first time in years. "I think I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. "You don't have to do this alone," Ethan said. "Whatever happens, we face it together." She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. There was no fear in them now, only determination. "I know," she replied. "I've realized something. I spent my whole life trying to live up to the expectations of others. I've been trapped in a role I didn't choose. But now, I get to decide. I get to choose who I want to be." Ethan smiled, a look of pride in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, Syria. You've come a long way." Syria took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle in her chest. "I'm going to confront my father. I'll tell him that I refuse to marry Prince Kalen. I'll tell him that I won't be part of his political game. I'll make it clear that I'm not just a princess to be used for alliances. I'm a person, and I deserve to make my own choices." Ethan's smile widened, but there was also a hint of worry in his eyes. "Are you sure? Your father won't take this lightly. He could try to stop you." "I know," she said, her voice steady. "But I can't live my life for anyone else anymore. If he disowns me, then so be it. I'll create my own future, one that's mine to shape." Syria felt a rush of strength fill her. For the first time in years, she felt in control of her destiny. She had always been the princess, always been the symbol of the empire, but now she was more than that. She was a woman, a person with dreams and desires of her own. Ethan took a step closer to her, reaching out and gently taking her hand. "Whatever happens, I'll be there with you. We'll find a way through this. Together." Syria squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth and strength in his grip. She had spent so much time pushing him away, thinking she had to face everything alone. But now she understood. She didn't have to face it all by herself. Ethan was her ally, her friend, and in many ways, he was the one who had helped her find the courage to make this decision. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their moment, and Syria looked up. It was one of the palace servants, carrying a message. "Your Highness," the servant said, bowing respectfully. "Your father has requested your presence in the throne room." Syria took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. "I'm ready," she said, more to herself than anyone else. She turned to Ethan, her eyes meeting his one last time before stepping away from the balcony. "Stay with me. I'll need you." Ethan nodded. "Always." Together, they walked through the corridors, the air thick with anticipation. Each step they took brought her closer to the confrontation she had been avoiding for so long. As they entered the throne room, the grand doors closed behind them, and Syria's father, King Darius, rose from his seat at the throne. "Syria," the king said, his voice stern and commanding. "You've made your decision, I assume." Syria stood tall, her posture firm. She knew this was the most important moment of her life. "Yes, father. I've made my decision." "Then you've chosen to reject your duty?" the king asked, his tone hard. Syria took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I reject being a pawn in your games, father. I will not marry Prince Kalen. I will not live my life according to your plans. I am not just a princess to be used. I am a person, and I deserve to choose my own future." There was silence in the room, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The king's face darkened, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You would abandon your family for this, for a common soldier?" Syria met her father's gaze without flinching. I would choose freedom over duty. I would choose love and respect over political alliances. I will not be forced into a life that isn't mine." The king looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold but with a hint of resignation. "Very well. If this is your decision, then you are free to leave. But know this, you will no longer be welcome here. You will no longer be my daughter." Saria's heart clenched, but she stood tall. "I will be my own person now, father, and I will live my life on my own terms." With that, she turned and walked away, Ethan by her side. The door to the throne room opened, and as they stepped into the light, Syria realized something. She wasn't just walking away from the palace, she was walking toward a new life. A life where she could finally be free. As they stepped outside, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Syria felt ready to face it. Together, they would build a new life, and it would be a life of their own making.